Montana Territory. September 1882, the train screamed once, then choked to a halt in a cloud of steam and cinders. Vera Halloway stood at the edge of the depot platform. One gloved hand pressed hard to her mouth, the other clutched around the worn handle of her carpet bag. Her brown traveling coat hung heavy on her shoulders, soaked through with the last hour's rain. Behind her, the train hissed and groaned as porters unloaded crates and trunks. Ahead of her, the tracks curved away into the bare fall hills. She was alone. He had not come. Her chest burned, her throat thick with the kind of ache that didn't pass quickly. She blinked fast, refusing the tears, but they came anyway, hot and quiet slipping down her cheeks as the truth settled into her bones like the cold. He had left her. And not just her. "Mama," the small voice pulled at her like a rope. Vera turned. Her daughter stood near the bench, brown curls damp and clinging to her round face. Penelope was only 5, her coat too big, mittens too thin. She held her baby brother's hand, Peter, barely 3, who clung to a ragged stuffed rabbit and looked around with wide, uncertain eyes. Vera knelt, pulled them both into her arms. "It's all right," she whispered, though it wasn't. Not yet. They had come all the way from Kansas City. Her hope had been foolish, she saw that now. A man who could leave his children behind once could always do it again. She stood slowly, shoulders squared. The platform emptied. The rain turned to mist, and then came the sound of hooves. Clop, clop, clop. A tall man on a dark horse rode up slow to the edge of the tracks. He wore a dust-stained duster, his hat low over his eyes. He stopped his horse right beside her, boots resting in worn stirrups, reins loose in one hand. "You waiting on someone?" he asked. His voice was low, steady. Vera looked up, met his gaze. His eyes were a clear gray, sharp as a flint edge. His face was lean, sun-worn, with lines around his mouth that spoke of quiet days and hard work. "I was," she said, "but he is not coming." The cowboy studied her for a breath, then looked at her children. Penelope clutched Vera's skirt again. Peter hid behind it, peeking out. He dismounted slowly, not rushed, like he had all the time in the world. "Name's Xavier Rourke," he said, offering his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His palm was rough, solid. "Vera Halloway." He looked at the children again. "Yours?" "Yes," he nodded. "You got anywhere to go?" "No." He did not ask why, did not ask what had happened, just looked at her like he already understood. Then he said it. "You'll ride with me now." Vera stared at him. She should have said no. She did not know him. He could be trouble. But something in his eyes stopped her doubt. They were not the eyes of a man who would leave a woman crying beside the tracks. Penelope tugged her hand. "Can we go, Mama?" Vera looked at her children, then back at Xavier. "All right," she said. He nodded once, then turned to his horse. "Got a wagon just over the rise. You and the young'uns can ride in back. I will walk the horse alongside." She followed him. They crested the hill behind the depot, where a covered wagon waited, canvas stretched tight across the frame. The horse's reins were looped around a fence post. Xavier lifted Penelope and Peter into the back, then helped Vera climb up. She settled them on a folded quilt. "Where are we going?" "I got a small place outside Red Elk Crossing. It is not much," he said as he climbed onto the front bench and took the reins. "But it is warm, safe." Vera sat in the back, her arms around the children, listening to the creak of the wheels and the soft clop of hooves. Her heart was still full of ash, but in that quiet ride, something small stirred beneath it. Hope. They reached his land near sunset. The ranch house was simple, one-story, wide porch, smoke curling from the chimney. A barn stood behind it and a chicken coop off to one side. Xavier helped them down, showed them inside. The main room was warm from the fire, the scent of stew thick in the air. "You cook?" he asked. She nodded. "Good, I will fetch water. Y'all get settled some." She watched him go, her children already curled up on a blanket near the hearth. She had never met a man like him. Quiet, steady, not one extra word. But everything he did, every look, every motion came with a kind of weight, like he meant every small thing he gave. By the time he returned, she had laid out bowls and found bread cooling in a cloth on the table. They ate together. The children laughed. It was the first time they had laughed in days. After, Xavier offered the bed to Vera and the children. "I will take the cot in the barn, do not argue, you need the rest more than I do." She looked at him, her mouth half open to protest, then closed it. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once, then disappeared into the night. She lay awake a long while, the children asleep on either side of her, the fire down to coals. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and in her heart something shifted. A man had taken her hand when she was broken. And now, for the first time in a long time, she was not afraid. The next morning came with frost crusting the split rail fence and a pale wash of sun edging across the hills. Vera stepped out onto the porch, pulling her shawl tighter across her shoulders. The boards beneath her feet creaked faintly, but the house was still, the children sleeping deep after the long journey. She saw Xavier in the pasture, moving slow and steady along the fence line. He carried a feed sack over one shoulder and walked with a quiet kind of purpose, like the land spoke to him, and he knew how to listen. A pair of sorrel mares stood near the far trough, watching him with mild interest. They didn't spook when he got close. He didn't speak to them, just worked in silence. Vera stepped off the porch. The grass was stiff underfoot, the air sharp against her cheeks. She didn't call out, just walked the slope down to where he knelt, mending a gap in the fence wire with a pair of pliers. "You hungry?" she asked softly. He didn't look up right away, just twisted the wire tight, then stood, brushing his hands on his trousers. "I could be," he said. "I found some flour and lard in the pantry. There's biscuits baking now, I'll make coffee," he nodded. "Children still sleepin'?" She looked back toward the house. "For now, you sleep all right," Vera hesitated. "Well enough." He didn't press her, just looked out toward the trees edging the pasture. "Storm'll come soon. Mountains this time of year don't give much warning." "I've never been through a mountain winter," she said. "You'll want more wood stacked in the lean-to. I'll get started on that this afternoon." She studied the lines at the corners of his eyes, the way he didn't fidget or fill the silence. "You don't ask many questions. No use in questions that answer themselves. And the ones that don't," he looked at her then, not sharp, just direct, "those'll come when you're ready." Vera nodded once. She liked that about him, that he didn't push. She turned to head back up the slope. "You cookin' like that every morning?" he asked behind her. She stopped. "Would it be welcome?" "I reckon it'd be real welcome." Inside, the biscuits turned golden just as Peter padded into the kitchen, dragging his rabbit by one ear. Vera scooped him up, kissed the crown of his head. The warmth of the fire filled the room now, and the scent of rising dough eased something tight in her shoulders. By the time Xavier came in, shrugging off his coat, she had the table set. He washed his hands in the basin by the door, then sat at the corner opposite her. Penelope climbed into the bench beside her brother, already eyeing the jam jar. Xavier passed the butter without being asked. "You got a rhythm to you," he said. Vera looked up. "How do you mean?" "Like you've been setting tables in strange kitchens your whole life." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I have. Your hands know what they're doing. That's worth more than most folks think." She folded a napkin in her lap. "I don't know what's ahead, not really." He broke a biscuit in half, steam curling up into the air. "No one ever does. But you'll get through it." After breakfast, Xavier took the children out to the barn. Vera watched from the window as he lifted Peter up to see the hens, then showed Penelope how to hold out her palm for the feed. She turned away, heart full and unfamiliar. It wasn't a feeling she trusted yet. But it was something. Later that day she stood near the back of the house, sleeves rolled, scrubbing linens in the wash basin. The wind had picked up, tugging at the line where a few shirts already hung. She didn't hear him approach until he was beside her. "I cleared the old cot from the back room," he said. "Figured it'd make a better place for the little ones to sleep." She straightened, water dripping from her forearms. "You didn't have to do that. I know." She looked at him, then down at her hands. "I should pay you something for the food." "The roof. You will, just not in coin." She raised her eyes. "Not asking for anything you don't offer freely," he said. "But I figure what you know, what you've lived, there's value in that. We're not strangers anymore." She thought about that. "I can sew," he nodded. "There's a pile of mending in the trunk by the stove. I'll see to it." They didn't speak again for a while. Just stood side by side as the wind moved through the cottonwoods, and the sky turned the dull slate of late afternoon. The quiet between them felt more like understanding than absence. That night, after the children were settled in their new room, Vera stepped out onto the porch. The moon was full, the hills silvered. Xavier sat on the edge of the steps, whittling a little piece of pine into shape. She eased down beside him. "What are you making?" "Not sure yet. Maybe a horse. Maybe a dog." She rested her hands in her lap. "You really don't ask questions you already have answers to." He didn't look at her. "Wouldn't be fair. Most folks carry enough weight without someone pocking at their bruises." She looked out at the horizon. "I was 17 when I married. Thought love meant saying yes, even when it hurt." He set the carving aside. "You don't owe me your past. I know." She turned toward him. "But I want you to know it." He waited. "He was charming," she said. "Kind when it didn't cost him anything, but he had a temper like a struck match. And when things got hard, he left. Twice. The second time I didn't follow." Xavier's voice was quiet. "You waited for him anyway. I didn't want to believe I'd chosen wrong." "You didn't choose wrong. He just didn't stay right." She breathed deep, the night air cool in her throat. "You ever lose something that changed you?" "I lost a brother in the war. Lost a few more to the bottle after." "I'm sorry." "Me too." They sat in silence again, the kind that didn't press. The children's laughter still echoed faintly in the back of Vera's mind. It didn't feel like a new beginning, not yet, but it wasn't an ending either. Xavier reached down and handed her the half-carved shape. "Maybe it's a rabbit," he said. She turned it over in her hand. "Maybe it is." When she looked at him again, his eyes met hers, not searching, just seeing. And for the first time in years, she let herself be seen. By the third week, the rhythm of life on Xavier's land had begun to settle around Vera like a second skin worn in. Not quite comfortable, but familiar enough to keep the loneliness at bay. The leaves had turned, the gold and rust of them scattered across the yard each morning like offerings. There was always work to do. Vera took to the mending with a quiet diligence, setting her stitches while the children played with sticks and pine cones beneath the porch rail. She swept ash from the hearth, boiled root vegetables, and learned the creak of the back door hinge. Xavier never said much, but his silences grew easier to dwell inside. He'd started pointing things out to Peter: how to hold a hammer, how to tell when a nail was bent beyond use. Penelope followed the chickens now, naming each one like a friend. Vera watched them both gain steadiness in their steps and in her heart. One morning, while she was rinsing jars at the pump, Xavier came from the barn carrying a small wooden box. He set it on the porch rail, then opened the lid. "I found this in the loft. Belonged to my mother," he said. "She used to dry herbs and roots in the kitchen window. Thought you might want it." Inside were bundles of faded string, a rusted darning needle, 2 glass jars with remnants of dried chamomile. Vera touched the edge of the box like it might vanish. "She died a long time ago?" she asked. He nodded. "When I was 19. Vera traced the worn grain of the lid. Did she teach you how to keep a house? She taught me how to keep it from falling in on itself. I figured the rest as I went. She looked up. You've done more than that. He met her eyes. So have you. Later that day, she boiled the dried chamomile and let it steep in a tin cup. Peter wouldn't touch it, but Penelope said it smelled like sunshine. Vera didn't say what it reminded her of a field outside Lawrence, where her mother had once taken her, before the war, before her voice had gone ragged with coughing that never left. That night, after the children had gone to sleep in the back room, Vera lingered at the table, folding a length of muslin. Xavier came in from the barn, brushing hay from his sleeves. "I've been thinking on the shed," he said. "The roof's near ready to give. If it caves under the winter snow, we'll lose the tools." "I could help with patching," she said. "If you show me how." He rested a hand on the back of the chair. "It's not light work. I'm not light." He gave a small breath, almost a laugh. "No, I suppose you're not." She looked up. "You always speak so plain," he shrugged. "Never saw the sense in dressing things up. I used to talk circles around everything, tried to patch over what I didn't want to see." He didn't answer right away. "Then, you don't do that now." "I don't have the strength anymore. You've got a different kind." She studied the callus along his thumb, the way his hand stayed still on the worn wood. "You ever think of leaving this place?" "Not lately." "You?" "I used to think I'd end up near the coast. Someplace where the air smelled like salt." He glanced toward the dark window. "I don't know what salt air smells like, clean and sharp, like something waiting." He nodded once. "This land's all I've known, but I wouldn't be afraid to see more." Vera folded the muslin again. "I think I'd like to see more with someone who doesn't walk away." He didn't move. "I don't take to walking out, not once I've said I'd stay." She rose then, slow, the fabric slipping from her hands. They stood in the hush of the lamplight, not touching, not needing to. "I'll help with the shed in the morning," she said. "All right. And I'll start a root cellar. The slope near the back fence should hold." He nodded. "You've got a mind for seeing what's needed." She gave a faint smile. "I want this place to last." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Xavier stepped aside, letting her pass. That night, Vera lay in the bed with one arm around Peter, the other stretched toward the empty space where her fear used to live. It was quiet now. Not gone, but no longer in charge. And in the barn, Xavier sat beside the lantern, carving a new piece of pine, longer this time, with ears not quite even. He set it beside the first one and leaned back. The wind outside curled around the eaves, but the walls held firm. The first snow came in the night, soft as breath and just as silent. Vera stepped outside at dawn, the porch boards cold beneath her soles, and watched it settle across the land in clean, unbroken layers. The hills beyond the pasture were pale and still, their sharp edges softened under white. Smoke curled from the chimney, slow and steady. Inside, the children were still asleep. She'd risen early, unable to rest, something unsettled sparking behind her ribs. She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders and crossed the yard to the barn, the snow crunching faintly underfoot. The doors were already open. Xavier stood on a stool near the back wall, hammering the last of the slats into place where a draft had crept through. He glanced over when she entered, then returned to his work without speaking. "I woke up thinking about the river," she said as she stepped inside. "The one east of here. I haven't seen it yet." He drove the final nail and stepped down. "It's not far, 3 miles or so, twists down past the cottonwoods." "Do you ever go?" "Only when the cattle need watering and the creek dries up. It's slow-moving this time of year." She leaned against the stall gate. "I used to sit by the water back home, before I had the children. It was the only place that felt quiet inside." He set the hammer down on the workbench and wiped his palms on his trousers. "You want to see it?" She looked up, startled. "With the snow, it'll keep until midday. If you want to go, I'll take you." "What about them?" she asked, tilting her head toward the house. "Mrs. Ellerby's boy comes by twice a week to check the traps. I can send word with him to have her sit with the little ones for a spell." Vera hesitated. "I didn't think you were the sort to leave the land." "I don't most times." He looked over at her. "But sometimes folks need more than a roof over their heads." By late morning, they rode out together. Xavier led the way, Vera on the smaller of the mares, wrapped in her thickest coat. The snow had eased, leaving the trail crisp and untouched. The trees stood hushed around them, bare branches etched dark against the sky. They didn't speak much during the ride. The air didn't ask for words. It was enough to hear the horse's breath and the creak of leather, to feel the steadiness of motion underfoot. When they reached the river, it was just as he'd said, slow-moving, dark beneath the thin ice forming at the edges. A fallen tree arched across the bend, its roots clawed into the bank like a hand that couldn't let go. Vera dismounted with care, her boots pressing into the drift. She walked to the edge and crouched, gloved fingers brushing the pebbles where the ground showed through. "When I was a girl," she said, "I used to imagine I'd walk far enough along the water that it would take me someplace different, someplace where I didn't have to be careful all the time." Xavier stayed a few paces behind her, one hand resting on his saddle horn. "I was careful for years," she went on, "with my voice, my face, my steps. I thought if I got small enough, stayed quiet enough, I'd be safe." She stood and turned to face him. "But I don't want to be small anymore, not here." He studied her, then said, "You're not." She took a step toward him. "You knew I'd been hurt. You didn't ask how. You didn't need to." "I saw it in your eyes," he said. "Didn't need the story to believe it was true." "I want to stay," she said then. "Not just through winter. I want to build something here with you." He didn't answer right away. The wind stirred his coat, the brim of his hat casting a shadow across his face. Then he said, quiet but clear, "I've been waiting to hear that." She reached out and took his hand, the cold leather of his glove rough against her palm. He didn't pull away. He just stood there, solid as he'd always been, and let her hold on. They rode home side by side. The sun hung low behind the clouds, casting long, dusky light across the hills. Near the barn, Vera saw smoke rising from the chimney and Penelope's small figure on the porch, waving hard enough to tip herself sideways. Xavier helped her down, but didn't let go of her hand right away. "I'll bring the wagon tomorrow," he said. "You and the children can ride into town. There's a woman there sells proper winter coats. I'll see to it." She blinked, surprised. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. He let her go then, and she climbed the steps to gather her children into her arms. That night, after the house had gone still, Vera sat at the table sewing patches into Peter's trousers. Xavier came in from the cold and hung his coat by the door. "You keep mending things," he said, watching her fingers move. "It's what I know." He stepped closer. "I'd like to build something new with you, not just fix what broke." She set the needle down. "Then we'll start tomorrow." He nodded once, then reached out and touched her cheek with the back of his fingers, just a brush. She leaned into it, the warmth of the fire casting gold across his face. "Stay tonight," she said. "I will." And he did. By December, the valley had gone hushed beneath snow that hadn't melted in weeks. White blanketed the pasture fence rails and clung to the limbs of the cottonwoods, ice ringing the pump handle like a thin sheath of glass. Inside the house, the hearth burned near constant, its warmth soaking into the floorboards and chasing back the edge of cold. Vera stood at the table, rolling dough with practiced care, her sleeves pushed to the elbow. Penelope sat nearby, stringing dried apples onto a length of twine for the window garland. Peter napped in the back room, Curled beneath the quilt Vera had pieced from old scraps Xavier found in a trunk behind the barn. Xavier stepped in from the cold, stamping snow from his boots just inside the door. He carried a bundle wrapped in canvas under one arm, his face ruddy from wind. He set it down on the table without a word and began unwrapping it. Vera paused, her hands dusted in flour. "What's this?" He pulled back the final layer of cloth to reveal a folded length of fine wool, deep blue with a narrow stripe of red woven near the hem. "I traded for it. The weaver north of town had a surplus. Said it was meant for another order, but that man never came back." Vera reached out, fingers brushing the fabric. "This is too fine. It's warm and strong. Like you," he said, eyes steady on hers. She folded the wool slowly, pressing out the creases. "I'll make coats for the children first. There might be enough left for a shawl. I was hoping you'd make a dress." Her hands stilled. "A dress?" He leaned on the edge of the table, voice low. "Something you'd wear if you wanted to marry a man who'd never leave you cold or alone." Penelope looked up from her garland, wide-eyed. Vera blinked once, then looked down at her flour-covered hands. "I haven't thought about a wedding in a long time. I've thought about it every day since you picked up that first biscuit pan." She laughed softly, a breath escaping her lips. "That's not a very romantic beginning. It's the truth." She met his eyes then, full and unguarded. "What kind of wedding did you have in mind?" "Whichever one you'd stand beside me for." She set the wool down gently. "Then you'll need to clear the parlor. I'll stitch the dress by Christmas." That night, after the children were asleep, Xavier brought in a cedar branch he'd cut from the ridge. He stood it upright in the corner near the stove and lashed it to a post with twine. Vera tied paper stars from scraps of newsprint. Penelope added her garland, and Peter, when fully awake, tucked a wooden rabbit at its base. 3 nights before Christmas, they gathered in the parlor with Reverend Kells from the Circuit Church in Red Elk Crossing. The children dressed in their best, Penelope's boots polished, Peter's shirt freshly mended. Vera wore the blue wool dress, plain but carefully stitched, her hair pulled back with a single ribbon Xavier had found in a tin with his mother's buttons. The vows were spoken quietly, hands clasped, firelight warming the walls. No fanfare, just promises made without condition. Afterward, they shared a supper of roast hen and potato cakes, and Xavier lifted Peter onto his lap while Vera leaned into his side, her head resting just beneath his collarbone. They didn't speak much that evening, but they didn't need to. The house felt full in a way that had nothing to do with the fire or the food. In the days that followed, Vera moved her few belongings into Xavier's room, and the children settled into the rhythm like they'd always belonged. Xavier built a shelf beside the bed for Vera's sewing basket. She found his boots lined up beside hers each morning, the leather brushed clean. Come spring, when the thaw broke open the river and the meadow turned green again, Vera planted onions and carrots in a patch near the back fence. Xavier repaired the plow, and Penelope learned to gather eggs without startling the hens. Peter followed the rabbit carvings Xavier had whittled, now lined across the mantel with ears slightly crooked. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Vera stood at the porch rail, watching the light fall on the hills. Xavier stepped up behind her, his hand resting on the small of her back. "You ever miss the salt air?" he asked. She shook her head. "No. The air here carries things I never expected, things I didn't know I needed," he nodded. "Me too." She turned to him, her hand sliding into his. "We were both waiting for something to hold." "I was waiting for you," he said. And she leaned in, kissed him slow and quiet beneath the first stars of the season. They never left that land. Vera built a garden that fed them through each winter. Xavier taught Peter how to mend harnesses and build a fence that could weather a storm. Penelope grew into a woman who could saddle her own horse and cook a stew without burning the bottom. There was no grand fortune, no sudden wealth. Just hands worn smooth with labor, laughter woven into the walls, and a love that held fast through every season. And when the wind came down from the northern ridge, rattling the windows and stirring the snow, Vera would pull the blue wool shawl tight around her shoulders, Xavier's hand finding hers beneath it. They would sit by the fire with their children asleep nearby, and know, without doubt, that they'd built a life no storm could shake.